welcome to the Conversations podcast, where we believe conversations create change. I'm.
Why do you
Is
have your
this-
radio host?
Is this how we're starting the podcast?
Why do you have your radio host?
Let's ignore her. Let's do this one more time. What? What do you mean?
You had your radio host vibe
What's my
on.
radio host vibe?
What you just said. Okay,
I
go
start the podcast. I start every podcast except.
Start over. Go.
No, I'm insecure.
No, you're doing great.
Hey, welcome to. Well, it's much?
No, I'm a little delusional.
Yeah, don't do that. Okay, 3, 2.
Okay, hold on. Let me get the giggles out.
Well, hey, welcome to the Conversations podcast, where we believe conversations create change. We're your hosts, Mike and Steph, and we are so grateful that you're with us here today. This is episode number
9.
9.
Yes.
Can you believe that we've done 9?
9 episodes. I mean, next week, 2 weeks from now,
Yes.
is going to be our very last episode for season 1.
For season 1.
We did one entire season, 10 episodes almost.
We did. And we're so excited for the future of Conversations. And today, we're really excited about today's conversation. It's really a topic that we've been talking a lot about, but we've been talking about how to build emotional intimacy. Now, before we get there, we can't ignore the fact that we just moved past a day that for some matters.
Yeah.
And for others, it doesn't. Am I bitter about it? No.
You sound a little bitter.
I'm not. It's not like, it's not like I was like intentional and me being intentional, like really, you want to talk about it?
Do you want to talk about it? Do you want to tune in our listeners as to what's going on here?
Yeah, well, we should probably talk about Valentine's Day for sure, because you were under the impression that I was aware that you don't like Valentine's Day.
My love, we have been together
Yeah.
for well over a decade.
Yeah. We've done
I
dinners.
have never liked Valentine's. Never.
That's crazy.
Ever. I have loved.
You know what?
Wait, hold on.
Okay,
Pause.
go
I
ahead.
have loved
Yep.
like indoors, but I think it was last year or the year before I did the whole.
You know what was one of my favorite dates that we've ever been
on Valentine's Day?
It was on Valentine's Day.
What?
It was when we first started dating, and I took you to that little Italian restaurant in Miami Lakes, where there was this mafia guy who always sang live music.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's talk. Why aren't you a fan of Valentine's Day?
I just don't like Valentine's Day.
Well, why? Why?
I just don't. I prefer staying in. I prefer doing something cozy in the house. It could be something creative.
Okay. So, it's not that you don't like Valentine's Day. You just don't like going out on Valentine's Day?
To be fair,
Yeah.
our anniversary is literally the week right after
Oh my
Valentine's
gosh, you
Day.
know what? You're right.
And for me,
I'm so sorry that I want to celebrate our love. So you know what?
you're
I didn't
so
know.
bitter about it.
I didn't know it was a problem. That's crazy. I'll know next time. God forbid I want to celebrate our love on multiple
I
days.
really appreciate your intentionality
Yeah, definitely.
in wanting to make Valentine's Day special, and I love you for that.
I love you too.
Yeah.
I love you too. Now I am open-handed with Valentine's Day.
Mhm.
I don't
Doesn't sound like it.
I don't have like a love or a hate thing with that. But I like it. I feel like sometimes life is really busy.
Yeah.
And when you're not intentional, like, which is normal, it happens. We can pass each other by.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, we actually have a day on the calendar where we can just be intentional, and
Yeah, but we also have like every other day on the calendar.
right. Yeah, that's true. That's true. So would you say like there's this thing that I'm noticing that Valentine's Day now is more of a girl's holiday?
Like Valentine's is, or the Galentine's
Yeah.
for the day. I actually saw a really cute trend online.
Yeah.
And they called it Famintine.
What?
I think that's the name.
I've never heard of that.
And it was like family Valentines,
Oh, that's actually really sweet though.
right?
Yeah, I do
That was
like
so
that.
cute.
Yeah, I mean, do you think maybe you would like that day if we
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I would want to make Valentine's Day like special
Yeah, for
for
sure, for sure.
the kids
But
and
I
stuff.
just kind of have like this problem now with like Valentine's Day, like so many people like online. Valentine's Day is a girls' holiday. It's like, well, what happened to the guys? Like, why did you
Oh,
guys
you like
just
that? So you do like to
why did you guys
celebrate
just
it.
like kick us out of the picture, you know? But then at the same time, Valentine's Day is also a day where a lot of guys get in trouble because they're no longer sometimes they're not intentional.
Yeah.
So now it's like we're off the hook.
No, you're not off the hook.
Oh,
Well, actually, I've never cared for it. So
got it,
yeah,
got it. Okay.
we're fine.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, love.
It's
I know
okay.
that hurt your feelings.
I love you. I just know that next time celebrating Valentine's Day and our anniversary,
Our anniversary definitely
yes, a couple
is more
days away.
important.
Okay, so whether you like Valentine's Day or not, one of the things that we know for sure is that emotional intimacy is something that you can build on any day.
Yeah.
Whether it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday,
Did you forget Friday, Saturday, Sunday?
Saturday, Sunday, unless it's fantasy football night. So I'm totally kidding. But
You don't even like fantasy football.
I don't, but I have a friend who loves fantasy football and he refuses to do anything except fantasy football on Sundays.
Got it.
So you can build emotional intimacy on any day. Okay, let's talk about what emotional intimacy is just really, really, really quick. Emotional intimacy basically means it's somebody who can know you deeply. Emotional intimacy refers to the connection you and your partner have. It's a connection where you feel safe, a connection where you feel vulnerable. It's a connection where that partner knows your inner thoughts, knows your inner fears, knows your desires, knows your worries, knows your anxieties. It's intimacy. I once heard somebody use this word intimacy like in two ways. Intimacy, in a sense, means into me, you see, So it's a very close look at someone that you're doing life with.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that understanding of like being seen
Right.
and being understood.
And known. Yeah.
Yeah, being known and also being valued.
Mm-hmm.
Like how many people do not feel valued in their relationship, and emotional intimacy is so important. I mean,
Right.
there's so many different ways that we can connect, right?
Definitely.
Like there's different ways of connection, and emotional intimacy is actually one of them, and it's very important. There's physical intimacy, there's emotional intimacy, there's intellectual intimacy, and there's spiritual
Right.
intimacy. Those are called like the four pillars of intimacy. And a lot of people, for example, especially nowadays, like in our culture, in the dating world, for example, if they're someone's single and they're like wanting to be in a relationship, they put a lot of emphasis, for example, on the physical part,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's different components to physical intimacy,
Right.
but that's one of them. That's like one pillar, right? Then there's the
What
emotion.
what does physical intimacy look like?
So physical intimacy, outside of just like the sexual intimacy part,
Right.
physical intimacy is that like that physical representation of your love. So it's the non-sexual touch, right? It's like the holding of the hands, it's showing affection, like
Mhm.
physically, it's turning towards the other person, it's giving, you a cheek. It's when I'm passing by and I, rub your shoulder or rub your back. It's being intentional about connecting with you on a physical
Right.
level.
Right.
And it's a physical manifestation of that love,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then there's intellectual intimacy where it's, you can have like mentally stimulating conversations about, things that you are both interested in or something that you're interested in, and, me, something that I'm
Which,
interested
by the
in.
way, I just want to say some of my favorite conversations with you
Yeah.
are usually around this whole intellectual intimacy
Yeah.
part and spiritual intimacy as well.
Yeah.
Like a couple days ago, this was one of my favorite things that we did. We went to Universal Studios
Mm-hmm.
and we just sat down in like their fake little Central Park area that they have
Yeah.
there. And we sat and we spoke for hours just on things that we were learning, and
Yeah.
it was beautiful. And I actually felt like our intimacy grew.
Yeah.
Like in that
100%.
moment, it was great.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we were connecting there. I think both, right? Intellectual and
Right,
spiritual, because
spiritual.
we were talking about the Bible, and the plan that I'm doing. And then we got into a debate. And what I love, what's important about the intellectual part that a lot of people don't realize, and it takes a lot of maturity to get there, is you can respect another person's like opinions and,
Right.
without maybe agreeing with them. Like you and I have very different opinions about a lot of things.
No way.
you know and they're not like values driven, right? They're just like random things on random topics, but it builds intimacy. Like
Right.
when you can have your opinion, I can have my opinion,
Definitely.
and we can talk about it, and
Yeah.
I can understand it from your point of view,
Right.
and vice versa, without necessarily agreeing.
Yeah, 100%.
That builds that type of intimacy.
Definitely. Okay, so we have quite a few different ways to build that intimacy. You
Yeah.
mentioned spiritual, intellectual, physical.
Yeah.
But I think today we're going to talk about what I believe is probably, if not the most important, one of the most important, and that's emotional intimacy. I almost look at emotional intimacy as the foundation which you build upon.
Mm-hmm.
All other forms of intimacy sometimes become very, very difficult when you're not emotionally intimate first. Emotional intimacy, I think, is the cornerstone of your relationship. Without it, couples can feel distant, misunderstood, and isolated. And when we focus on all the other ways to be intimate, but we lack emotional intimacy,
Mm-hmm.
I kind of feel like the house that's being built can actually crumble.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I know so many couples that, for example, and this can sound bizarre because it can happen both ways, right? Where you can be so emotionally disconnected that then you are never physically intimate,
Right.
or, and you don't have, intellectual conversation. So that part of the intimacy, but I know other couples, for example, that they substitute the emotional intimacy for purely physical intimacy.
Right.
Right. And then what happens is that on the emotional part, you feel so disconnected, and the only way that you can actually connect is physically. And so you think that that's good, but actually inside you feel void, right? You feel that
Sure.
that sense of disconnection. You feel lonely. There's that sense of loneliness, like where you can be with someone and you can be around someone and you can be in a relationship. You can even be married to someone and still feel that sense of isolation, that emotional loneliness. And it's truly an epidemic that happens so much in the context of relationships. And that's a detrimental thing that happens when we don't focus on emotional intimacy, when we don't nurture emotional intimacy in a relationship, or people don't even know what emotional intimacy is.
Right.
Like that concept is not even something that they can wrap their mind around, that I need to be intentional about nurturing with someone. And then you have a spouse that feels disconnected and
Right.
they feel lonely, and you feel like you're alone in the relationship. And a lot of times it's because you have that disconnection on an emotional level. A lot of people, they'll confuse like being alone with loneliness. Like, you'll have a conversation with someone that it's like, but you're not alone. Why do you feel so lonely?
Right.
When you're alone, it's like the physical representation of not having anyone around you, not having anyone in your corner. Most people are actually not alone.
Yeah.
Most people actually feel lonely, and they're constantly surrounded by people. And loneliness is that psychological state of not being emotionally connected with others. That happens so often in a marriage when we don't take the time to connect, on an emotional level.
Right. Absolutely.
And this has such an impact on our physical bodies. Like there's so much research that shows that people who are not emotionally connected to their partner or to people in general actually experience so much health issues
Right.
as a result of it. This is why it's like my catchphrase, right? Like the quality of our life is strongly impacted by the quality of our relationships. That includes like yourself, your body,
Right.
And so when we are not intentional about nurturing and building on emotional intimacy, and we focus on the other ones, or we put more weight on the other ones, then this happens. We feel lonely.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we definitely know is that the lack of emotional intimacy in a relationship is just as painful as feeling alone or being lonely.
Yeah.
Right. So being emotionally intimate with your partner, your husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, it's the foundation of your relationship. In fact, there's even studies that say that when you're not emotionally intimate with the person that you're doing life with, it actually plays and affects your mental health badly.
100%.
Depression increases.
Yeah.
Anxiety increases, right? Why? Because you're feeling alone,
Yeah. You become withdrawn.
right? You
You
become
know.
withdrawn.
Yeah. I mean, we've been together for 13 years. And this is not something that is not new to us.
Right.
You know, there actually was a season in our life where I felt lonely, you know,
Yeah.
and it's partly, I mean, this has so much, this is very layered, right? A lot of it has to do with the way that we were both brought up,
For sure.
right? And the way that we didn't even know what this meant, like what this was, what is emotional intimacy, you know?
Right.
So it was even hard to articulate how my needs were not being met. And then, so if I can't articulate the way that my needs are not being met, then how are you supposed to meet them?
Correct.
You know, that's what's, you know, called an unrealistic expectation. And so it's such a painful experience, right? Because there's nothing more that a person wants than actually connecting with their spouse, with their partner in life, you know? And so when you are not connecting on that deep emotional level, you feel withdrawn. You know, it almost feels very isolating. And so hopefully through this conversation, anybody that's listening, you know, can understand, and maybe we can help put words to your experience and can help you take the next step into how to build an emotional, intimate relationship with your partner.
Definitely. Okay. So I think we built some great tension around why emotional intimacy is so important. We know that emotional intimacy is the foundation of a relationship. And without emotional intimacy as that foundation, the house can crumble. It can cause us to feel lonely. So I think let's go ahead and give them some practicals.
Yeah.
Let's talk through some practicals on how to be emotionally intimate. And this is what I wrote down for the first one. If you want to be emotionally intimate, you actually have to be emotional. Now, when I say that, let me tell you what emotional does not mean. Emotional does not mean acting erratic. It does not mean a crazy amount of tears. It does not mean yelling. It does not mean being out of control,
Dramatic,
sometimes
impulsive.
impulsive, reactive. Sometimes society has labeled that as emotional. Oh, you're being so emotional.
Yeah.
Right?
Or people equate emotion so much to like crying, like, oh, she's so emotional.
Right.
It's like, actually, were you yelling? Because, oh my God, you were so emotional.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I almost say that there's been a bad stigma
Yeah.
placed on that word emotional. Okay. So we talked about what being emotional isn't. Let's talk about what emotional actually means. Being emotional is about being self aware and open to how you feel about your joys, your fears, your frustrations, your hopes, and expressing these feelings constructively.
Yeah.
It's about having the ability, it's about being grounded enough to be self-aware with how you're feeling and actually express that well.
Yeah.
Now, I think that there's a lot of reasons why many people are emotional in the right way. They're probably emotional in the wrong way, which is the erratic, the responsive, the reactive. Once upon a time, I was very much like this. I would feel big feelings and
Really?
oh, stop it right now. Thank God for therapy. Shout outs to Joel. But once upon a time, I would feel my big feelings and I did not want to be grounded. I did not want to sit in them. I did not want to feel them and relax. So it would just cause me to explode. It would cause me to explode. Now, one of the things that we know is that we usually model the behavior that we've been taught,
Yep.
right? So I'm just like, I don't think I grew up in an environment that actually modeled what emotional intimacy actually is. Now, this isn't the fault of my mom or my parents, right? I think we just repeat what we've learned. I also don't think that they have been in an environment where they have been taught what it actually means to be emotional. You know, my mom came from Cuba at 21 years old.
Yeah.
She was an immigrant.
Yeah.
She was raising a son by herself. So she was on full on survival mode. So the concept of being emotional was just not existent. It was
Yeah.
just like we just got to put
You didn't
through.
have, I mean, you don't even have a choice at that point. At
Right.
that point, your literal goal is to survive.
Right.
You know?
Exactly. So I didn't learn it. And my mom also didn't have somebody who created a space for her
Yeah.
to allow her to express how she truly felt, you know, in that moment in time.
Yeah.
So that's number one. I think number one, it hasn't been modeled. But I think another reason is because there's a misconception. And the misconception is that if you're emotional, it usually equates to weakness.
Yeah.
Society often equates emotional expression with weakness, especially for men.
Yeah.
right? Like I think we live in a time where for men, emotions are frequently associated with tears, with breaking down, with expressing anything beyond anger. You
Yeah.
know, it's like, oh, if you're angry and if you're like, like laying down the law and you're raising your voice, and then that's what it means to be a man.
Yeah.
And that's actually not true. It's actually what it means to be a child, right?
Dang.
Because that's what children do. Like
That's
when
right.
they're
They have no
upset,
emotional regulation
they
skills.
have
They don't.
no
Their brain is not developed enough to even
correct.
know how to handle those emotions.
Exactly. They have no emotional regulation.
There's so many adults now that like, when we see them, people don't think that way, but it's actually like throwing a tantrum.
Right,
You
right.
know?
Exactly. Exactly. So yeah, I think we live in a time where it's like, well, if you show too much emotion, you're weak. But I actually think that's false. I think expressing emotion isn't a weakness, but it's actually a strength.
Yeah.
I think emotional maturity involves having the courage to feel deeply and respond wisely.
Ooh, say that again. That's so good.
Say it again for the people in
In
the
the back.
back. Emotional maturity involves the courage to feel deeply and respond wisely.
Yeah.
Right? There's a great example of emotional maturity and emotional intimacy that Jesus himself displays. There was this one scene in John chapter 11, verse 35, where you see that Jesus, God in the flesh, his best friend at the time, Lazarus, died. And Jesus, who is God in flesh, had a moment where the scripture usually, like it clearly shows that he was sad. It actually says that he cried. I mean, he knew that he was going to have the ability and the power to fix the whole thing. But it just made me think that if someone like Jesus, which by the way, is the leader of all leaders, right? I mean, he led 12 guys, and thousands of years later, of Jesus, it's all over the globe, right? He was a leader. And if someone like Jesus had the confidence to display emotions as a man,
Yeah.
how much more should we? So I think one of the things that we want to talk about is just like, how do we apply? What are 4 ways to start practicing emotional expression? Well, number one, I said you got to name that feeling,
Yeah.
right? So like whenever you're in the middle of like, what are you actually feeling? Like, let's learn to put words to what we're feeling. Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you feeling joy? Are you worried? I think this is so important. I've noticed it in our relationship as well, where I will find myself acting not my best way. And it can actually create a wedge in our relationship when I'm just acting like not cool and you have no reason why.
Or I'm even asking like, "Hey, are you good?"
Right.
And you're like, "Yeah, I'm good."
Yeah,
And
I'm
I'm like,
fine.
"Well, clearly you're not good."
Everything's totally okay. Everything's good, right? But I realized that whenever I actually say like, "Hey, this is why I'm acting this way," you give me the space and the grace to just feel.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not just naming the feeling, but it's expressing it appropriately. So instead of saying, "I'm fine, I'm good," maybe you can just say, "I'm just frustrated because things aren't moving forward the way that they are," or
Yeah. Or I've
I'm
had a really tough day today and it's not you. I'm not angry with you, but I'm just having a really hard time showing up in my best way.
yeah,
Right? Like just actually being able to articulate what you're feeling,
yep,
expanding that emotional vocabulary, going far beyond like I'm just mad or an infamous one. I don't accept this in my therapy room when I'm like, "How are you doing?" I don't know.
yeah,
Okay, then let's sit down and actually figure out what's going on,
yeah,
right? Because
exactly.
sometimes it's a cop out, it's an avoidance mechanism for us not to sit with or be able to identify
Right.
what it is that we're actually feeling. So I love that, like expanding your vocabulary,
Yeah,
naming that feeling, and then expressing it appropriately. Our feelings are not bad
right,
within themselves. Like we can feel really intense, overwhelming emotions, but we have a responsibility on how we are going to respond to it
right,
and how we're going to express it. Like I can be really, really, really upset. And in my anger, I may want to, I don't know, throw some hands.
yeah,
But that is not an appropriate way to express my anger,
yeah, for
right?
sure.
So it's my responsibility to say, hold on a second. I'm feeling really upset right now. And before I say or do something that I'm going to regret, I'm gonna put a pause, and I'm gonna go, and I'm gonna express my feelings in a way that's appropriate and safe within myself.
Yeah, that's great because emotions are great passengers. They're never great drivers,
Exactly.
right? So we never want to be led by our emotions.
Yeah.
And another way to practice emotional expression is simply sometimes you just got to ask for what you need.
Yeah.
Like you might be in a spot where you're feeling extremely overwhelmed and maybe you just need to say, you know what, I think I need a few minutes just to think this through. Let me get some time. And then lastly,
Or like,
oh, go ahead.
I need a hug.
I need a hug.
I'm feeling really sad,
Yeah.
I need a hug, right? Sometimes like that alone, expressing what you need in the middle of it. But it's crazy because a lot of times, like especially I see this so much in couples, where one of the partners, like the spouse, is feeling one way, and they're like, now, let's say they're sad, right? They're sad, something happened, they're feeling sad, and then they're interacting with their spouse, and their spouse is not really understanding that they're sad.
Mm-hmm.
So now they're mad.
Right.
And
Right.
now it creates, a rift between them.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
now they were sad. My spouse they're not even attuned enough to know that,
Right.
that I'm feeling that way. And now they're angry.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
And so instead of saying, man, I'm sad, and expressing, I kind of just need a hug, or
Mhm.
man, I really just want, to sit on the couch for a couple of minutes and cuddle so that we can, so that I can just tell you how I'm feeling. Instead of expressing that need, it causes a rift,
Yeah.
without your ability to express it.
Yep, exactly. And then the fourth way that I had that you can apply emotional expression is by leading with honesty,
Yeah.
and just model it. Just model it. Lead by example, whether it's in a relationship or some sort of leadership role, by being transparent about what you're feeling without losing self-control.
That's right.
Mhm.
So the first thing that we have to understand is that it starts with us.
Right.
Right? Like emotional intimacy starts with self-intimacy. It starts with self-awareness. I cannot give you something that I myself don't have. I feel like our relationship is such a testament to that right at first, because neither of us like grew up with an understanding of what any of this was, right?
Right.
Like we come from households where none of this was really taught, not because they didn't want to teach it to us, but because they didn't know themselves,
Mhm.
and so it starts with us, like us being able to identify, us being able to articulate, us being able to self-reflect, us being able to go inward and turn towards ourselves and attune with ourselves, so that we can actually it starts with self-awareness. And then from that level of self-awareness, then we can express our emotions.
Mhm.
So first it's actually know what you're feeling, and then you're able to express it. And it sounds so elementary, it sounds so simple, but so many people actually miss it. And the reason as to why the expressing of our emotions can be so difficult is because everyone has a different way that they express, that they process, that they think about, that they verbalize
Right.
their emotions, right? So like you and I are very different, right? I would say, actually, are we different when it comes to processing emotions? I think we kind of are. I
Yes.
think we have some similarities in that we're both verbal processors,
Sure.
right? Like
Yeah.
I'm a verbal processor. So sometimes I'm like thinking the thoughts that I'm thinking in my head,
Yeah.
and I'm like processing it out loud. But sometimes it depends on what it is.
Mhm.
I actually need some space,
Mm.
right? So it can feel like I'm withdrawing, but I'm not. I just need some space to like think about it inside before I actually express it, right? And I think for the most part, you would say you're a verbal processor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you process things by like
I like to
talking them through.
process it. I like to attack it. Sometimes I need some space, but that's rare. As
Very rare.
most often,
That's how you know things are real bad,
yeah.
right? If you're like, I need some space.
Yeah, oftentimes I'm usually the one like, hey, can we talk?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but a lot of people have just different ways,
Yeah.
right? And this comes from so many different things. Like the way it comes from our attachment styles, right? It comes from our primary caregivers. Like the way that our families processed emotions has a really big impact on the way that we as adults process emotions, right? So for example, like if you grew up in a household where feelings were not validated, you probably have a really hard time with vulnerability, right? Because that was never modeled to you.
Mhm.
And so it's important for us to keep that in mind because we can have a lot of blind spots that can create a disconnection in our relationships if we're not aware of how we ourselves process emotions. Like if you take a moment to think about it, like how do you process emotions? So many people don't even know. Do they need to retreat? Do they need to journal? Do they need to express? Do they need to take a walk and just think? What way do you express your emotions by like action? Right? Like are you the kind of like action oriented person that when they are feeling intense things like they need to do, right? And problem solve in order to process, whatever it is that they're feeling inside? And so it's important. Otherwise, it can become a blind spot. And then it creates a rift. It creates a sense of disconnection and it disrupts that emotional intimacy. And when that emotional intimacy is disrupted, there's no security
Mm-hmm.
in a relationship, which is why emotional intimacy is so important because it's what creates security in our relationship.
Right. Yeah, that's so good. And I love what you shared because really we're talking about learning each other's emotional language.
Yeah.
And just like how you mentioned, my emotional language sometimes is to attack the problem and talk about it immediately. And sometimes for you is like, hey, I need just a little bit of space. I'm not withdrawing. I just need to think about it. And it's really important that we know this because if not, you can get offended by the other person's emotional language, thinking that they don't want to solve the problem,
Yeah.
but they're actually just trying to solve the problem the only way they know how to in that moment.
Yeah, and it creates another blind spot where like you don't even notice your partner's attempt at
Right.
connecting with you emotionally
Right.
because you're not even aware within yourself.
Yep, absolutely. 100%. And I'm loving this conversation so much because I really think it's actually going to be really helpful for some people. And I like this quote. It says, just like learning a new language requires practice, learning your spouse's emotional language takes time and effort, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
But it's worth it. Maybe like you're watching today and you're like, man, we're lacking emotional intimacy. We don't know how to connect. It feels like we're missing one
Where do I
another.
even
Where
start?
do I even
Are we
start?
too far gone? We've been married for far too
Yeah,
long. We've
everything
been
feels like an
together.
argument. It's complicated, whatever the case might be. And I just want to say if that's you, like that's
Everybody.
normal. That's normal. I think that's just a part of the process of learning to live with another imperfect human,
Yeah.
trying to build a beautiful relationship.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just need a third party in your corner to listen in on the conversation and to help you gain awareness.
Really being able to create, like being able to be in the presence of a person that can give you an insight. Like sometimes we're so close to a
Correct.
situation
Correct.
that we can't really see far beyond it. But when you can get someone that can give you a wider scope, you can actually see a clearer picture in a better way.
Right. Absolutely. Well, hey, I've really enjoyed today's conversation, and we really hope that you guys have as well. And I hope that today, maybe after today's episode, there's something that you can take away with and you can start practicing. And sometimes it's just one foot in front of the other. And maybe it's just starting with one. Like, what's one thing that you can do to start creating that pattern for emotional intimacy in your relationship? Maybe it's just naming an emotion. Like maybe it's just having a moment throughout your day where whenever you're feeling something that feels somewhat negative, if you've got a spouse, if you've got a boyfriend or a girlfriend, you're engaged or whatever the case might be, that could be a great opportunity to practice emotional intimacy. That could be a great opportunity for you to be like, hey, you know what? I'm not feeling my best today. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling angry. And I think the reason that's important to do it is because what you don't communicate verbally oftentimes is communicated physically, or sometimes just the vibe of the relationship becomes a little
Behaviorally, yeah.
right behaviorally. Sometimes the vibe of the relationship just feels off simply because a conversation wasn't had. So maybe it's just naming it, or maybe it's just checking in with your partner. Maybe it's just like being intentional about asking them, hey, how are you doing? How is your day going? How are you feeling?
Or even asking like, how do you process your
Right.
emotions?
That's a great question.
Like you actually having the conversation of like, are you a verbal processor or are you, the kind of person that needs some space in order to
Right.
think before, and that's how you process like in solitude? Or are you an expressive kind of person that likes to problem solve and expresses their feelings through action, right?
Exactly.
So being able to even just have that conversation can already nurture intimacy because now you're gaining an insight that you didn't have
Well,
before.
yeah, it definitely helped for us because early on in our marriage, you would quote unquote, in my eyes, shut down every
Yeah.
time we were having an issue. I'm like, why is she shutting down? Does she not care about the problem enough to actually talk about it? And the issue wasn't that you were shutting down. The issue is that you were just feeling so much that you needed a moment to really think through it so that you can re-engage in a healthy way.
Yeah.
So I think that's actually brilliant. That's such a great exercise. Just having a conversation with your partner and just asking them, hey, what is your emotional language? How do you like to process? How can I show up better for you when we're in X, Y, or Z scenario?
Well, listen, we're
Yep,
just so thankful that you decided to tune in to episode
exactly.
number 9 of Conversations Podcast with Mike and Steph. But I am so
Yeah,
excited
definitely.
because in 2 weeks,
Right.
actually, in 2 weeks, we are going to be launching our last episode for season 1 of our podcast. And
Yes.
we've actually already recorded it.
We did.
We've got a huge surprise because we've got our very first
We do.
guests
We do. Yeah.
on the pod, and it is such a good conversation. We can't wait for you to tune in to that. So make sure that you follow us on Instagram, Conversations with Mike and Steph. Make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube
Yeah.
channel. Follow us on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify so that you can stay up to date with everything going on in our podcast.
That's right. We'll see you guys soon. And don't forget to join in on the conversation because we believe conversations create change. We'll see you next time.